Hi guys, welcome back. We're here to continue Phantasma by Kaylie Smith, and I thought we would do the same lighting as we did last time because it's a little easier on my eyes when I'm reading. But we left off on chapter 13, Nerves. Angel, you have not seen even a modicum of what I am capable of, the handsome green-eyed bastard whispered in her ear as he pinned her back against the wall with a hand at her waist. I could make you utter things you never thought you'd possess the will to say just to get a taste of what I have to offer. His tongue flicked out to lick the pulse throbbing at the side of her throat to emphasize his point. She hated the way her body arched into him of its own volition as it searched for the friction it craved. He kept his grip on her waist as he slid his other hand into her hair and angled her mouth up to his. She made a sound of breathy pleasure when he bit down on her bottom lip hard. Her hips began to writhe forward into the hardness she could feel growing at the front of his trousers, and his hand at her waist began to slide down, ripping away the skirts of her dress too. A bell tolled. Ophelia shot up in her bed, hair clinging to her forehead and temples with sweat. She glanced at the clock across the room and was unsurprised to find that she had dozed back off and slept through both breakfast and lunch. Her body and mind had been utterly exhausted from the past few days, not to mention her wounds, and sleep was when the magic in her veins took its time to heal her injuries. Another toll. She scrubbed a hand over her face before stretching out her limbs and assessing her clawed-up arm. The skin was as good as new. Her shoulders relaxed with relief. That was definitely one advantage to the family magic. She pushed back the covers and stood to look around the room, confirming there was no grotesque ghouls lying in wait for an ambush. The fatigue still clinging to her bones, mixed with the needling paranoia this place constantly bred in her mind, almost made her regret turning down Blackwell's bargain. Almost. She had sent him away after his ridiculous revelation, laughing at the notion of giving up a decade of her life when she could just find Genevieve all by herself. For one, who knew how many years she had left? Giving 10 of them away would surely be a perilous decision. Besides, Blackwell hadn't put up a fight over her dismissal anyway. He had only nodded at her rejection and wasn't randomly showing up to vex her or intrude on her rest. As if waking hours weren't filled with enough ghosts, now she had a smug phantom haunting her dreams. He's doing it on purpose. As she started dressing for the day, or rather, night, she had a sinking worry that there might come a point when she'd pay an egregious amount to be able to sleep peacefully. Shaking off that thought, she nimbly laced up the corset of her black velvet dress, pulling the strings as hard as she could until she was barely able to breathe. Something she would regret later when she'd have to wrestle with the stays to get them off. Sometimes it took both her mother and Genevieve to undo her corsets with how tight she made them, but she didn't know what to expect out of Phantom's trials, and the last thing she wanted was faulty knots being a hindrance. Quickly tying a matching ribbon into her hair, she slipped out of her room, hoping it wouldn't take too much time to find her way back to the dining hall so she could squeeze in a meal before things began. She was already ravenous from skipping dinner the night before. Plus, she was hoping she might finally run into someone fully corporeal that she could ask about Genevieve. It took a bit of trial and error as she retraced her steps, but eventually she found her destination. She walked through the familiar open archway and took in the extravagant display of food on the expansive dining table as her stomach growled. The architecture of the dining hall was more than ornate than she remembered, but perhaps that was only because she had been too busy falling through the ceiling to notice. There was no sign of the ordeal now, the ceiling fully intact, the debris nowhere to be seen. There was a large black and gold rug that spanned the entirety of the floor, and the filigree wallpaper beneath the ornate picture frame molding was the definition of opulence, as were the marble pedestals and statues that lined the walls on either side of the archway, identical chases to the one she had crashed into sitting between each pair of stone columns. When she had finished gaping at the elegant details, she was surprised to find she wasn't alone. The girl with the flaxen braids, Lucy, she remembered, was hunched over a bowl of soup, looking alarmingly haggard. Large purplish bags now set beneath Lucy's hollowed eyes, her pale complexion almost gray. And it wasn't until Ophelia sat down at the table and began fixing a plate that her presence was noticed. "Oh," Lucy squealed out in surprise. "Long day?" Ophelia asked, tone neutral. Lucy nodded quietly and looked back down at her soup. Apparently, whatever had stolen her sleep had also stolen her friendliness, which was more than fine by Ophelia. The two of them ate in silence before a few other contestants in their group began to trickle in. One was a smarmy-looking man who had missed a button on his vest. A woman with wine-colored curls and an onyx hoop pierced through her septum filled in behind him. The woman looked content to keep to herself at the far end of the dining table, which officially made her Ophelia's favorite so far, especially when the man plopped himself in the chair next to her, left and caused the plates in front of them to clatter. "Eric Greensboro," he greeted. "My father is Donald Greensboro, owner of the city's largest tobacco plant." "You are?" "Not interested in socializing," Ophelia answered. Her patience with the men in this place was wearing unbelievably thin. Something tightened in Eric's eyes, but his smile didn't waver as he turned to Lucy and tried. "You're Lucinda, right? Kate's cousin? Have you heard you barely survived last night?" Lucy winced a bit but didn't respond, and Eric let out a deep sigh. "I would get stuck with the most boring group in this place," he muttered, mostly to himself, before announcing a bit louder. "That's just fine. Makes it easier on me when you all inevitably drop out or get slaughtered. Don't expect any help." "You can't even button your vest correctly," Ophelia pointed out. "I doubt you were going to be anyone's first choice for assistance, anyway." Lucy's lips curled up in a small smile as she sipped another spoonful of her soup. Eric's mouth twisted at the insult, but he still looked down to check her claim, standing from the table to stalk away when he noted that she was, in fact, right about the buttons. "He's insufferable," Lucy muttered. "That seems to be a running theme with every man here," Ophelia observed. Lucy gave a humorless laugh before leaning forward and whispering, "Rumor has it that his father's business is nearly bankrupt after a full debacle with not paying their property taxes, and that's why he's here. They use their estate as collateral, and I certainly have no room to judge." Ophelia nodded politely, but didn't offer anything more, and they both settled into silence once again. She needed to get to level 7 before she could look for Genevieve, and she suspected that blending into their group was a better strategy than striking out too much, and she didn't want to risk making any attachments. She wasn't sure what game Phantasma was playing by forcing players into these groupings, but she was sure it wasn't in order to help them win, which meant trusting anyone here was not a strategic move. By the time everyone in their group had finally appeared in the dining hall and she had finished eating, it was almost sunset. Their first trial was about to begin, and anxious conversations on what they might expect began to buzz through the room. "The levels are based on the 9 circles of hell," said a middle-aged man named James, with sandy hair and a thick beard. "I read an interview with a past contestant in the New York Post once. They described games of deceit, wrath, greed, limbo." "Are you saying they're going to transport us to limbo?" Eric mocked, smoothing a hand down the front of his adjusted vest. James huffed. "Not the real limbo on the other side. At least, I don't think. It's more of an illusion from what I've heard. One that feels very real." "We aren't going to have to work together, are we?" someone else asked. "I sure hope not," Kate said, from where he leaned against the back wall with a sneer. "What, you're too good for help?" James countered. Kate gave a quick, sharp laugh. "I have a bet running that you'll be the first one out, old man." "When the hell is this thing going to start so all of you can shut the fuck up?" the woman with the septum piercing muttered from her corner. The second those words were out in the open, every light in the room snuffed out. "Welcome to level 1, a deep masculine voice boomed. Ophelia's eyes slowly adjusted to the dark as he continued. "I'm your host, Zell." With that, a puff of smoke wafted up from the floor by the archway, and Ophelia's mouth went slack at the sight, her dinner forgotten. A devil. With that, gasps around the room resounded at the sight of the egregiously tall man dressed in an impeccably tailored crimson suit. The curved horns that adorned the crown of his head jutted out from bronze curls that complemented his dusky brown skin and amber eyes. Horns, his devil's mark. The grin on Zell's face stretched as he took in the terrified expressions around him, as if response was exactly what he was hoping for. Ophelia fought the urge to roll her eyes at the pure drama. Zell's amber gaze flicked over to her for a brief moment, then as if he could hear her thoughts, she froze. Each devil possessed a range of different abilities, which made it hard to anticipate exactly what you were dealing with if you ever met one. And Ophelia knew from her mother's lessons that mind reading was not off the table. I have the pleasure of explaining how the events of each level will transpire. Do listen carefully, because I do not repeat myself, Zell warned, waving a hand at the wall to his left, where a doorway now appeared. This is the portal that will take you into the first level. Each of your hosts will provide you with a clue about what to expect inside. That will be your last chance to forfeit. Once you step through, the level will begin, and your only way out are winning, bargaining, or death. The tension in the room grew thicker as people began to shift uncomfortably on their feet, glancing around as if they hoped the other's presence would be a reassuring sign that they could possibly be mad for participating in such a risky game when everyone else here was doing the same. If you complete the trial successfully, Zell continued, you will be brought back to Phantasma and receive your winner's mark. Are you ready for this level's clue? Before anyone could confirm that they were ready, the older man James chimed. Winner's mark? What does that entail? Will it be permanent? And what happens if you don't complete the trial? Is there a mark for losing? Zell's smile was unforgiving. I suppose you'll find out if you fail, won't you? Now pay attention. Here's your clue. They all watched with rapt focus as the devil flicked his hand toward the portal and words began to burn themselves into the door's surface with his magic. In deepening light, where senses fade, a labyrinth vast, a daunting maze. No sight, no sound, no touch to guide, navigate true, or be crushed inside. Beware the beast within the heart, and find the door back to start. Ophelia tried to commit as much of the riddle to memory as she could, but the devil wasted no time moving on. When I call your name, step through, Zell directed. Lucinda! Everyone snapped their heads toward Lucy, who was now a sickly shade of white. Kate snickered when she hesitated. Something about the sound must have bolstered her determination, though, because she tilted her chin up, rolled her shoulders back, and took a step toward the door. The entire group waited with bated breath as she swung the entrance open. Ophelia wasn't sure what she expected to see on the other side, but it certainly wasn't a plain white wall. Step through, Zell ordered. Lucy took a deep breath and followed his directions. The room tensed, waiting for a scream of agony or some other sign of distress, but none came, and an instant later, Lucy completely disappeared from view. The devil called the others' names in turn, and when he finally got to Ophelia, there were only a few contestants left waiting. She could still turn around and leave, with very few to witness her embarrassment, but she steeled her nerves. She could do this. She would do this, for Genevieve, for Grand Manor, for her family's legacy. She stepped through the portal and into the nothingness. Level 1. Chapter 14, Limbo. It was unnervingly silent, aside from the high-pitched ringing in her ears when she exited the portal. Her eyes burned as she looked around at the too bright stone corridor. Not a single other soul was around. She tried to take a step forward. And stumbled. A disorienting sensation rolled through her body, and she barely caught her balance against the opposite wall before she face-planted into the smooth cement ground. A silent gasp fell from her lips, and she snatched her hands away from the stone in front of her, curling them into her chest. She couldn't feel the wall. She couldn't feel anything. Not a single one of her senses was working, except for her sight. Racking her brain, she tried to remember what the clue had said. A daunting maze, no touch to guide, beware the beast. There hadn't been enough time for her to remember every detail, but so far, the bit about having no touch to guide was certainly accurate. She wondered what circle of hell this was supposed to be emulating. All her mother's lessons on the 9 circles of hell began flooding back to her. Ruled by the king of the devils, hell and its circles existed on the other side as a kingdom for all the different types of immortal paranormal beings. The immortal classifications of paranormal beings were able to access the 9 circles whenever they desired, sharing the territories with the souls of the dead. The best perk she got as one of the mortal classifications of paranormal being was a longer than average lifespan here on Earth before she crossed over to the other side. Ophelia might have preferred hell at this point. Despite what some mortals believed, hell was not meant to be a punishment for humans who lived sinfully before they died. Human mortality was much too diverse and fickle to base an entire afterlife on, after all. Rather, those who were punished in hell were often punished for their crimes against humanity on the fabric of the universe. The second major kingdom on the other side was heaven, home to all the classifications of ephemeral beings. And despite what humans' lore loved to suggest, the beings that belonged to heaven were no more good or bad than the ones of hell. It just happened hell had been bestowed the task of punishing malicious mortal souls, and heaven the task of rewarding the ones who died with exceptional valor. Ephemeral beings and their powers, however, were a subject her mother had never really expanded on, which was just as well, considering Ophelia thought she might find beings such as angels and seraphim in the territories they ruled rather dull in comparison. But there was certainly nothing dull about the tales of the 9 circles. Those punished in the circle of violence were ripped limb from limb at the start of each day, only to find themselves mended by the next dawn for the torture to begin again. Those punished in the circle of greed had to watch everything and everyone they coveted melt in a pit of boiling lava. Those punished in the circle of gluttony were forced to run without stopping for eternity. Those punished in the circle of limbo, that was it. This was Phantasma's version of limbo, complete sensory deprivation. She wondered which circle her mother had chosen to reside in on the other side. "You're never going to make it out," the insidious voice in her head whispered. "You'll die if you don't find your way out of here in exactly 5 minutes. "Stop!" she tried to shout at the voice, but there was no sound. She reached toward the wall again to tap her finger against it and neutralize the intrusive countdown her mind was trying to impose on her. But the comforting compulsion that usually overrode the inane task of the voice ordered her to do didn't have the same effect when she couldn't feel it. She felt the panic begin to creep in. "You're fine. There's no time limit. You just have to breathe." She cautiously started forward, her steps a little wobbly as she got used to the inability to feel. Making her way down the long, narrow corridor, she eventually found an opening in the stone. There was another long corridor on the other side of the opening, which forked into 2. The maze had begun. She chose left. Picking up her pace, she made a few more turns before she realized she had gone in a giant circle. She was entirely disoriented and wanted to curl up on the ground and sob. "This is maddening. This is hell." And then it got worse. The light around her dimmed, and dread bloomed inside of her. They were going to slowly lose their only remaining sense. She needed a plan. "I need a way to mark the paths I've already taken." She looked down at her hands. Her magic had to be useful for something. Concentrating on the tips of her fingers, she waited for the telltale sparks of her magic to ignite. Small fizzling flares of light began to expel sporadically in every direction, and a sense of relief shot through her. She reached out to the wall and used the sparks to scorch the word "start" into stone. Then she began. Every time there was a split in her path, she marked her first chosen direction with a charred X. And in the time it took to get through almost 11 unique passages, the light had dimmed twice more. "I can make it through about 5 quarters per round of light," she noted. "At this rate, there's probably about 10 more degrees of dimming before I'll be walking in the dark." At the next opening, she saw one of her X's marked on the left. She pivoted to the right this time, and the wall at the end of the corridor was moving toward her. Another line from Zell's clue came back to her. "Navigate true or be crushed inside." "Fuck!" She spurred herself into action, slipping through the next break in the stone a few yards before the moving wall could reach her. She hoped to be in the clear, but what she found in the new hallway made her breath hitch in her chest. The walls in this corridor were moving as well, which meant that if she didn't make it to the opening before they closed it off, she would be trapped. She yanked up her skirts and rushed toward the corridor. By the time she was halfway to the next opening, the moving wall was within inches of the gap's threshold, and she knew she had to push herself harder if she was going to reach it in time. Her breathing became labored, despite the fact that she couldn't feel the burning she was sure should have been igniting in her lungs. By the time she made it to the exit, the shifting wall was already halfway across it, causing her to wedge herself through the tight space and shimmy herself out the other side. She hunched forward, dropping her hands to her knees to catch her breath. She knew she must be sweating, but she couldn't feel it. All she could feel was the pressure in her chest as her body begged for more oxygen, and the heaviness in her legs and thighs. When she finally straightened herself up, she stepped forward. But something snapped her back against the wall. Her damn skirts were caught. She tried to scream in frustration, but no sound came out. Pressure pricked at the corners of her eyes, but if tears were sliding down her cheeks, she couldn't tell. She grabbed a fistful of her skirts and tugged sharply, causing the material to rip away with a jagged edge. When she'd spent her afternoons in grim manner daydreaming about the sort of danger that could make her heart race, it had definitely not been anything like this. A quick glance around the new corridor determined nothing was moving, for now. She continued her exploration, delving deeper into the labyrinth, her only measure of time, the dimming light. Every time she entered a new corridor, the length of her walk grew shorter and shorter. She was getting closer to the center. The light dimmed just as she marked another wall and started to the left, but it was immediately clear that it was the wrong way. The far left wall began to slide forward just as before, and she pivoted on her heels and sprinted in the opposite direction. As if in reaction, she caught the wall beginning to slide toward her faster out of her peripherals, chasing her. Damn it. There was another moving wall ahead, and this time the exit looked to be out of reach. She sprinted as fast as her feet would carry her, the wall behind her staying on her heels. A shot of fear speared through her as she reached the mouth of the exit, the wall behind her only inches from pressing into her back, when the one in front of her began to close in as well. She twisted her body to shuffle herself sideways through the tightening gap. In her mind, the shadow voice laughed. The notion of that laugh nearly tripped her up as she squeezed herself the rest of the way out into the next corridor, just before the two walls slammed together. The anxiousness beginning to bubble up in her stomach should have come from the fact that she had just very, very nearly been crushed like an insect. Instead, it was the idea that the voice in her head had just chuckled at the prospect of her demise, making her buzz with fear. The shadow voice had always spoken to her, of course, but never had it been this. Never had it turned her or taunted her or actively wished for her to be in pain. It had always been rather matter of fact in giving her the daily asinine tasks she had always been compelled to obey. As if it really didn't have a choice but to make her rush home in the dark within an arbitrary time limit, or knock on her headboard exactly 9 times before she went to sleep in order to keep her family safe. And now it was laughing at her. "What's wrong, little necromancer?" it purred. "Can't handle the real me?" Ophelia clenched her fist at her sides and shoved the voice away. She looked around, assessing the newest corridor, and was shocked to find that it wasn't another empty passage at all. She had finally reached the center of the labyrinth. Her victory, however, was short-lived, because in the heart of the maze slept an enormous beast. A hellhound. She recognized the monstrous beast from one of her mother's books on the creatures of hell in Grim Manor's library. The hound's leathery skin was white as snow, its talons and teeth a shiny ebony. The beast had been created to guard coveted artifacts by the king of the devils himself. They were vicious, with venomous bites, but they remained asleep as long as the item they were guarding stayed untouched. Ophelia crept around the hellhound, giving it as wide a berth as she could, but as she was about to get a glimpse of whatever it was guarding, 2 other contestants came crashing into the maze's clearing. Lucy's cousin, Cade, and someone whose name she thought was Buford, or Beau, or Bradley, whatever his name was. He barely spared her a glance as they gaped at the demonic creature sprawled before them. Cade waved to his friend to follow after him, and Ophelia nearly choked on her shock as they took off straight toward the beast. "Don't!" she tried to shout, but of course they couldn't hear her. She had a feeling that even if they could, they wouldn't listen. They made their way toward its flank, and she finally caught a glimpse of what the monster was guarding. A gilded trapdoor. She froze. It was the exit. That's what the hound was guarding, and whoever went through first would get unscathed. But the rest of them would have to deal with the woken beast. She gaped in horror at the realization. Cade and his friend were going to escape, leaving the rest of them to be devoured. She jolted into motion, but it was too late. Cade had already reached the door and unceremoniously yanked it open. The hound woke in an instant. A bursting pain shot through Ophelia's ears as her senses came roaring back. Her knees buckled and she tumbled to the ground, hands clamped over her ears. A flash of light shot across her vision as the two men stepped through the door and shut it behind them. With no other beings around, the beast locked its eyes onto her. "Fuck," she whispered. The hellhound lunged. Ophelia lurched to her feet and headed back for the twisted bowels of the labyrinth, the hellhound pursuing. She didn't have time to mark her path this time, only running faster than she ever had in her life and hoping she didn't turn into any dead ends. She dashed through the white stone corridors, feeling the rancid hot breath of the monstrous creature thicken the air as it gained on her. The pounding of its paws shook the floor beneath her feet. She gritted her teeth. This was those bastards' fault. Not that their selfishness should have surprised her. Desperate times, desperate measures, sure. But she would have at least waited for everyone who'd shown up to reach the exit before she went through it and woke the beast. The minor interaction she'd had with Cade had already left a bitter taste in her mouth, and when she saw him again, she was going to chew him up and spit him out for this. "Asshole," she hissed as she hooked the right and crashed right into another body. Spots flashed across her vision at the impact. She couldn't remember this contestant's name. He was about Genevieve's age, scrawny with light brown skin and hazel eyes. She pushed off of him and regained her balance, opening her mouth to tell him to run, but the hellhound rounding the corner did that for her. "Holy!" The boy's eyes widened, but she didn't bother to stay and hear the rest of his sentence. He scrambled after her, clamoring to stay on her heels. "Do you remember which direction you came from?" she shouted, her words ragged with effort. "Left, up ahead," he answered, his own voice labored. "But it's blocked now." She nodded and hooked the right when they approached the next opening, hoping it might loop back around to the large clearing where they'd be able to make a break for the exit without the hound guarding it. The beast was gaining traction and her new companion was slowing down. Ophelia glanced over her shoulder with gritted teeth. "Faster!" she ordered. His face was a mask of pain as he tried to push himself on, and at some point during the sprint he had pissed himself. And she saw the moment the exhaustion took over his limbs. The hellhound was getting too close. There was no way he was going to make it. She thought for a moment that maybe she should keep running away. That if the hound was distracted, it would be easier for her to get away. The locket at her throat warmed, as if it was admonishing her. Damn it! Ophelia skidded to a stop and spun. Summoning every ounce of magic she had stored in her core, she pulled and pulled until she felt its heat slither through her veins, her limbs, to her hands. Then she released it, all in a fury of blue sparks right at the hellhound's face. The action lacked finesse and aim, but it worked well enough. The beast let out a pealing whine as her magic hit its eyes, and Ophelia grabbed the boy's shirt and dragged him after her. They twisted down the corridors, having to backtrack a few times, but it seemed she had brought them just enough time to make those few mistakes. Then finally, the clearing came into view. "Thank the angels," the boy began to weep as they broke into the center of the maze once again, the gilded door just a few more yards away. Relief washed over Ophelia's body when they reached the golden exit. Twisting its knob, she heaved the door open, and the boy didn't hesitate to jump through. Behind her, in the maze, she heard a blood-curdling scream and the echoes of bones snapping like twigs. The hound must have already recovered from her magic. She swallowed thickly, a knot of regret twisting in her stomach, and leaped through the door, letting it slam shut behind her. Okay, guys, so we left off on chapter 15, Vermin. Wow. It is a lot like Hunger Games. Like, I get the same type of feeling. It's all about survival, but it's in a horror way. You know, Hunger Games was scary to me, too, because you gotta stay alive, but it didn't have, like, the ghosts and stuff in it, and the apparitions. So I really like this book. I keep wanting to read forward to see what happens. I think you can kind of guess what happens, but there's a lot to get through to find out what exactly happens. So thank you guys for being here, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Bye.